Imagine a woman dictating foreign policy to a king, not from a throne but from his private chambers. Picture another whispering military secrets to an emperor, her advice shaping battles. One court lady's charm and intellect even helped tear a kingdom away from a centuries-old religious authority. And then there's the concubine who, through sheer will and cunning, placed her son on the imperial seat and then guided his hand, sometimes with a gentle touch, sometimes with a bit more persuasion. These weren't queens in their own right, not at first. They were courtiers, ladies of the palace, whose influence was felt far beyond the silken drapes and gilded halls. Their power wasn't on paper, but it was real. So real, it changed empires. Get ready to dive into the stories of some seriously influential women who knew how to work the system from the inside. Number 6. Wu Zetian, the concubine who became an emperor. But first, she ran things from the sidelines. Meet Wu Xiao, later known as Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever rule China in her own name as Empress Regnant. But long before she claimed the dragon throne, she was a master of unofficial power, pulling strings from behind the imperial screen. Her story is a wild ride from a teenage concubine to the most powerful person in China. Wu entered the palace of Emperor Taizong of Tang when she was just around 14 years old. Her rank was carrying, a concubine of the 5th rank. She was known for her beauty and intelligence, but Taizong didn't seem to single her out for extraordinary favor. One story from this time, which Wu herself supposedly recounted later, involved Taizong having an untamable horse. Wu reportedly suggested she could tame it with an iron whip, then an iron mace, and if those failed, a dagger. This impressed Taizong with her ferocity, or perhaps it unnerved him. During Taizong's reign, it's said that Wu began an illicit affair with the crown prince Li Zi. This was a dangerous game, as such relationships were strictly forbidden and could lead to severe punishment. When Emperor Taizong died in 649, tradition dictated that his childless concubines, Wu included, have their heads shaved and be sent to a Buddhist monastery to live out their days. One to the Jianya temple. But her connection with the new emperor, Li Zi, now Emperor Gaozong, wasn't over. Gaozong was deeply infatuated with her. On an anniversary of Taizong's death, Gaozong visited the Jianya temple to offer incense and saw Wu. Accounts say they both wept. Gaozong's current wife, Empress Wang, was childless and feeling threatened by the emperor's favor towards Consort Xiao, in a move she would later regret. Empress Wang encouraged Gaozong to bring Wu back to the palace, hoping Wu would divert the emperor's attention from Consort Xiao, and that Wu, being a former servant, would be easy to control. Back in the palace, Wu quickly outmaneuvered both Empress Wang and Consort Xiao. She was skilled at palace intrigue and understood the emperor's desires. In 654, Wu gave birth to a daughter. The infant died shortly after. A dramatic and horrifying story, recorded by her political enemies later, claimed that Wu herself smothered the baby, and then, when Empress Wang visited, acted surprised and distraught, subtly implicating the Empress. Emperor Gaozong, already displeased with Empress Wang for her lack of a son and her alleged jealousy, believed Wu Zetian. While some modern historians question the veracity of this infanticide claim, suggesting it might have been propaganda. It became a powerful part of Wu's narrative and was used to justify Empress Wang's removal. By 655, Bu Zetian was made Empress. This was a huge step. Emperor Gaozong suffered from poor health, possibly a stroke, which led to debilitating headaches and vision problems. He increasingly relied on Empress Wu to handle state affairs. She proved to be incredibly capable. She was well-read, decisive, and had a keen understanding of politics. Officials would present matters to Gaozong, and he would often defer to Wu, who sat behind a screen listening. This practice led to them being called the Two Sages, or Two Holy Ones, by courtiers ruling China together. Empress Wu's influence was not just advisory. It was executive. She reviewed state documents, made decisions on appointments, and offered opinions on policy that Gaozong often adopted. She gathered a group of loyal scholars and officials around her, effectively building her own power base within the court. She was known to be ruthless with her political opponents. Those who opposed her rise or challenged her authority often found themselves demoted, exiled, or worse. She is said to have employed secret police to root out dissent, and accusations of treason, often with little evidence, were common against those who stood in her way. Empress Wang and Consort Xiao, for instance, were eventually imprisoned, and according to some accounts, died under cruel circumstances on Wu's orders, after Gaozong showed signs of wanting to release them. Yet, Wu also promoted talent. She advocated for agricultural reforms, reduced taxes, and initiated public works projects. She championed the cause of women to some extent, commissioning biographies of exemplary women. She was also a patron of Buddhism, elevating its status. During Gaozong's later reign, her power was so entrenched that few dared to cross her. She effectively managed the empire, especially during the emperor's prolonged periods of illness. While Gaozong was still officially the emperor, many of the critical decisions shaping China were being made or heavily influenced by Empress Wu. This period, where she was Empress Consort but acting as de facto ruler due to her husband's incapacity and trust, truly shanks her unofficial power. She wasn't born to rule, nor was she appointed to any formal governing office beyond being empress. Yet she steered the ship of state. When Gaozong died in 683, her sons became emperors in name, but Wu, as Empress Dowager and Regent, held the reins, paving the way for her eventual and unprecedented declaration as Empress Regnant of her own Zhao dynasty in 690. Her journey from concubine to shadow ruler, then to actual ruler, began with those crucial years of wielding power unofficially, learning the ropes and eliminating any obstacle. Number 5. Agrippina the Younger, the sister-wife-mother, who basically puppet-mastered Roman emperors. Agrippina the Younger was Roman royalty through and through, a woman born into the heart of imperial power who then schemed her way to even greater, though often unofficial, heights. She was the great-granddaughter of Emperor Augustus, sister of Emperor Caligula, wife of Emperor Claudius, and mother of Emperor Nero. Talk about a family tree. Her early life was marked by the brutal politics of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Her father, Germanicus, was a popular general and heir apparent, but he died under mysterious circumstances. Her mother, Agrippina the Elder, and 2 of her brothers were persecuted and killed by Emperor Tiberius. Agrippina the Younger herself was exiled by her brother Caligula after being implicated in a plot against him. But Caligula's assassination in 41 AD brought her back to Rome, and her ambition was far from quenched. Her ticket to the big leagues came with her uncle, Emperor Claudius. After Claudius's third wife, Messalina, was executed for treason and promiscuity in 48 AD, the position of Empress was open. Agrippina, despite being Claudius's niece, a marriage considered incestuous by Roman custom, requiring a special Senate decree to allow it, maneuvered herself into becoming his fourth wife in 49 AD. She was intelligent, politically astute, and utterly ruthless. Once married to Claudius, she didn't just sit back and enjoy the perks. She actively worked to consolidate power for herself and her son from a previous marriage, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would later be known as Nero. Agrippina's influence over Claudius was immense. She persuaded him to adopt Nero in 50 AD, making him joint heir with Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus, who was younger. Nero was then pushed ahead of Britannicus in the line of succession. She was granted the honorific title of Augusta, a significant mark of status and power previously held by very few women, like Livia, Augustus's wife. Agrippina appeared on coins alongside Claudius, sometimes even facing him, a visual representation of her almost equal standing. Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius paint a picture of her as the real power behind the throne during Claudius's later years. She allegedly influenced appointments, had rivals eliminated, often through accusations of treason or immorality, and amassed considerable wealth. She even wrote her memoirs, a rare act for a Roman woman, though they are now lost. She was instrumental in recalling Seneca the Younger from exile to become Nero's tutor, believing he could help shape Nero into a capable ruler under her guidance. The ancient sources are quite direct in accusing Agrippina of Claudius's death in 54 AD. The story goes that she served him poisoned mushrooms to ensure Nero, then only 16, would become emperor before Britannicus came of age and could challenge him. Whether she did it or not, Claudius died, and Nero ascended to the throne. In the early years of Nero's reign, Agrippina's unofficial power reached its zenith. She intended to rule through her young son. Initially, she was the dominant force. She tried to attend Senate meetings, though she was made to sit behind a curtain so as not to officially be present, a sign of her unofficial but recognized power, reviewed official correspondence, and made key decisions. Coins were even issued showing Nero and Agrippina facing each other, implying co-rule. She effectively acted as regent. However, Nero's advisors Seneca and Burrus, the Praetorian prefect, worked to gradually reduce her influence and encourage Nero to assert his independence. Agrippina did not take this sidelining lightly. She reportedly threatened to support Britannicus as the rightful emperor. Shortly thereafter, Britannicus died suddenly at a dinner party in 55 AD, under circumstances that many, including ancient historians, believed pointed to poisoning orchestrated by Nero, possibly with Agrippina's initial complicity, or at least tacit approval, if she thought it secured Nero. However, as Nero grew older and more confident, he increasingly resented his mother's interference. He entered into affairs she disapproved of, particularly with Poppaea Sabina, who reportedly urged Nero to rid himself of his domineering mother. The relationship between Nero and Agrippina deteriorated dramatically. Nero made several attempts to kill her, according to Suetonius and Tacitus. One infamous attempt involved a specially designed collapsible boat meant to drown her during a trip across the Bay of Naples in 59 AD. When the boat collapsed as planned, Agrippina, a strong swimmer, managed to survive and swim to shore. Realizing she knew he was trying to kill her, Nero then allegedly sent assassins to her villa, where she was finally murdered. Her reported last words to the assassins, as she bared her womb, were "strike here," indicating the part of her body that had borne Nero. Agrippina's story is a stark example of a woman who wielded enormous unofficial power through family connections, manipulation, and sheer force of will, only to be consumed by the very power struggles she excelled at. Number 4. Hürrem Sultan. From enslaved girl to the woman whispering in the Sultan's ear and changing an empire. From the slave markets of likely Ruthenia to the most intimate chambers of the Ottoman Empire's longest reigning sultan, Hürrem Sultan, also known as Real Sanana, carved out a position of unprecedented power for a woman in her time. She wasn't just a favorite. She fundamentally changed traditions and wielded influence that echoed through the empire's policies and succession. Believed to have been captured by Crimean Tatars and brought to Istanbul, she entered the imperial harem of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent around 1520. In the highly structured environment of the harem, where hundreds of women vied for the Sultan's attention, Hürrem's intelligence, charm, and cheerful disposition, her name Hürrem means the cheerful one, quickly captivated Suleiman. She rose from an ordinary concubine to become his Haseki Sultan, chief consort or favorite. This was already a significant achievement, but Hürrem didn't stop there. In a radical break with centuries of Ottoman tradition, Suleiman married Hürrem in a magnificent public ceremony around 1533 or 1534, making her his legal wife. Previously, sultans did not formally marry their concubines after the 15th century. This marriage elevated her status immensely and signaled her unique position. Suleiman was deeply devoted to Hürrem. Poems he wrote for her survive, expressing his profound love. He often consulted her on matters of state, and she became his trusted confidant. While she held no official political office, her proximity to the Sultan and his reliance on her counsel gave her enormous unofficial power. Hürrem bore Suleiman 6 children, including 5 sons, one of whom, Selim II, would eventually succeed him. This secured her position further. She was actively involved in the politics of succession, a dangerous and often deadly game in the Ottoman court. Her primary rival in this was Mahevrin Sultan, another of Suleiman's consorts and the mother of Seksaid Mustafa, the eldest son and a popular, capable heir apparent. Historical accounts, particularly those critical of Hürrem, suggest she skillfully manipulated Suleiman against Mustafa. She, along with her son-in-law, Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, allegedly convinced the Sultan that Mustafa was plotting to overthrow him with the support of the army. In 1553, Suleiman, fearing a rebellion, summoned Mustafa to his tent during a military campaign in Persia and had him executed. While the extent of Hürrem's direct involvement is debated by historians, many contemporaries and later accounts blamed her for poisoning Suleiman's mind against his popular son. The execution of Mustafa caused unrest and was widely lamented, but it cleared the path for one of Hürrem's sons to ascend the throne. Beyond palace intrigue, Hürrem's influence extended to foreign policy. She corresponded directly with foreign rulers. Preserved letters show her exchanging diplomatic notes with King Sigismund II, Augustus of Poland, discussing alliances and maintaining peaceful relations. This was highly unusual for an Ottoman royal woman. She also acted as an advisor to Suleiman on various state matters, and he valued her judgment. It's said she would inform him of goings-on in the capital while he was away on long military campaigns, effectively acting as his eyes and ears. Hürrem was also a significant patron of public works and charity. She commissioned numerous buildings, including mosques, soup kitchens, imarets, schools, hospitals, and bathhouses in Istanbul, Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina. Her most famous complex is the Haseki Sultan Complex in Istanbul, which provided services to the community. These charitable activities, known as Waqf, enhanced her public image and demonstrated her piety and power. Even after Suleiman moved the imperial harem from the Old Palace to the Topkapi Palace, the main administrative center, in the 1540s, a move largely attributed to Hürrem's desire to be closer to him in the center of power, her influence continued. She remained Suleiman's closest companion and advisor until her death in 1558. Suleiman mourned her deeply and was buried next to her in the Süleymaniye Mosque complex. Hürrem Sultan's legacy is complex. She was admired for her intelligence and charity, but also feared and criticized for her perceived ruthlessness and manipulation. What's undeniable is that she transformed the role of women in the Ottoman court, concentrating power in the hands of the Sultan's favorite to an extent never seen before, all without a formal title beyond wife and mother of princes. Her influence was deeply personal, derived from her unique relationship with one of the most powerful rulers of the age. Number 3. Anne Boleyn, the court lady who refused to be a mistress and accidentally sparked a reformation. Anne Boleyn wasn't just another pretty face at the English court. She was a woman whose intellect, ambition, and refusal to conform helped trigger one of the most significant upheavals in English history, the English Reformation. Her power, especially in the years leading up to her marriage to King Henry VIII, was profoundly unofficial, rooted in her personal hold over a king desperate for a male heir and captivated by her allure. Anne returned to England in the early 1520s after spending several years in the sophisticated courts of Margaret of Austria and then Queen Claude of France. This continental education gave her an air of refinement, wit, and style that set her apart from many English court ladies. She initially served as a lady-in-waiting to Henry VIII's wife, Catherine of Aragon. It was here that she caught the king's eye around 1526. Henry was known for his mistresses, but Anne was different. Her older sister, Mary Boleyn, had already been one of the king's lovers. Anne, however, famously refused to become another royal mistress. She wanted marriage and the crown. This stance was revolutionary. Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon, who had failed to produce a surviving male heir, only a daughter, Mary. The king was obsessed with securing the Tudor dynasty. Anne's refusal to sleep with him unless he married her, combined with his infatuation and his desire for a legitimate son, pushed Henry down a path that would change England forever. He became convinced that his marriage to Catherine, his deceased brother's widow, was against God's law and thus invalid. He sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII, for about 7 long years, from roughly 1527 to 1533. Anne Boleyn was at the center of the king's great matter. During this period, her influence over Henry was immense, yet entirely unofficial. She wasn't queen. She wasn't even officially his acknowledged fiancée for much of this time. But she was a constant presence, a powerful voice in his ear. She and her family, particularly her father, Thomas Boleyn, and brother George Boleyn, became key players in the Boleyn faction at court, advocating for reformist ideas and the break with Rome. Anne herself was a known supporter of religious reform. She owned and read prohibited evangelical texts, like William Tyndale's English translation of the New Testament. She introduced Henry to reformist writings that argued for the supremacy of kings over the church in their own lands. This intellectual ammunition was crucial for Henry, as he grew increasingly frustrated with the Pope's refusal to grant the annulment, largely due to pressure from Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Anne's influence extended to appointments and policy. She played a role in the rise of Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, both key figures in engineering the English Reformation. Cranmer, as Archbishop of Canterbury, would eventually declare Henry's marriage to Catherine void. Cromwell would mastermind the dissolution of the monasteries. While Henry was the ultimate decision-maker, Anne's opinions, her patronage of reform-minded individuals, and her constant presence reinforcing the king's own desires were undeniably a powerful shaping force. She was, in effect, a queen-in-waiting, wielding considerable sway over a king who was reshaping his kingdom to have her. Courtiers and ambassadors noted her power. Dispatches from the time often mention her influence on royal decisions and moods. In January 1533, with Anne pregnant, she and Henry married in a secret ceremony. In May 1533, Cranmer declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void, and his marriage to Anne valid. Anne was crowned queen in June 1533. Her unofficial power had seemingly transitioned to official status. She gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth I, in September 1533, not the hoped-for son. Even as queen, her power remained largely dependent on Henry's favor and her ability to produce a male heir. She continued to promote religious reform and protect reformist scholars. However, her strong will, sharp tongue, and involvement in politics created enemies at court, particularly among conservative factions who opposed the religious changes and resented her rise. After 2 subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriages, Henry's infatuation began to wane. He started to look elsewhere, perhaps believing his marriage to Anne was also cursed. By 1536, Anne's enemies, likely with Henry's tacit approval, moved against her. She was arrested on charges of treason, adultery, with 5 men including her own brother, and even incest and witchcraft. The evidence was flimsy and likely fabricated. On May 19, 1536, after a swift trial, Anne Boleyn was beheaded on Tower Green. Her reign as queen lasted just over 1,000 days. But her impact, largely cultivated during those years of wielding unofficial influence as a determined court lady, was monumental. She didn't just win a king's heart, she helped steer a nation towards a new religious and political destiny, all by refusing to be anything less than a queen. Number 2. Madame de Pompadour. the official mistress, who became France's unofficial prime minister and arts director. Jean Antoinette Poisson, better known as Madame de Pompadour, was not born into aristocracy, but she rose to become one of the most powerful women in 18th century France. As the official chief mistress, maîtresse en titre of King Louis XV, her influence extended far beyond the royal bedchamber, shaping French politics, art, and culture for nearly 2 decades. Her power was unofficial in the sense that she held no formal government office, yet she was for many years a de facto prime minister and minister of culture. Born in 1721 into a bourgeois family, her legal father was a financier who had to flee the country, and her mother's protector, a wealthy tax farmer, likely funded her excellent education. Jean Antoinette was groomed from a young age for a life of influence. She was beautiful, highly intelligent, talented in music, acting, and art, and possessed immense charm. It was said that a fortune teller predicted she would one day capture the heart of a king. After a strategic marriage to Charles Guillaume Le Normand d'Étiole, she established a popular salon in Paris, attracting artists and intellectuals. Through court connections, she managed to be noticed by Louis XV at a masked ball in 1745. Soon after, she was installed at Versailles, separated from her husband, and given the title Marquise de Pompadour. Her official role was as the king's chief mistress, a recognized position at the French court. But Pompadour was far more than that. Louis XV was an intelligent but often indolent and melancholic ruler, prone to bouts of indecision. Pompadour became his closest confidant, political advisor, and friend. Even after their sexual relationship reportedly ended around 1750, possibly due to her poor health, she retained her position and influence, transitioning into the role of the king's loyal companion and advisor. This was remarkable and demonstrated that her power was based on her intellect and personality, not just physical attraction. Madame de Pompadour wielded significant political influence. Ministers understood that to gain the king's ear or secure appointments, they often needed her support. She had her own apartments at Versailles, close to the king's, which became a hub of political activity. She would discuss state affairs with Louis, offer her opinions, and advocate for certain policies or individuals. She played a crucial role in the diplomatic revolution of 1756, the renversement des alliances, which saw France ally with its traditional enemy Austria against Prussia and Great Britain at the start of the 7 Years' War. This was a monumental shift in European foreign policy, and Pompadour was a key proponent of the Austrian alliance, partly through her friendship with Austria's ambassador. She supported ministers like the Duc de Choiseul, who became a dominant figure in French government, largely thanks to her patronage. Conversely, ministers who crossed her or whom she deemed incompetent could find their careers abruptly shortened. Beyond politics, Pompadour was a hugely influential patron of the arts and sciences. She championed the Rococo style and was a patron to artists like François Boucher, Jean-Marc Nattier, and sculptors like Pigalle and Falconet. She played a key role in the development of the Sèvres porcelain factory, making it one of the most famous in Europe. She supported writers and philosophers of the Enlightenment, including Voltaire, though their relationship had its ups and downs, and Diderot, interceding on behalf of the encyclopedia when it faced censorship. She had her own private theater at Versailles where she often performed, and she amassed a vast library. Her taste and patronage significantly shaped the cultural landscape of her time. However, her prominent role and bourgeois origins made her a target for criticism and slander. She was blamed for France's financial woes, though her spending, while lavish, was a fraction of state expenditure, and for military defeats during the 7 Years' War. Vicious pamphlets and songs known as poissonnades, a pun on her maiden name, poisson meaning fish, attacked her character and influence. Despite the constant attacks and her often frail health, she maintained her position through her intelligence, hard work, and unwavering loyalty to Louis XV. She once wrote, "My life is a combat." Madame de Pompadour remained Louis XV's most trusted advisor and friend until her death from tuberculosis in 1764 at the age of 42. Unusually, she died at the Palace of Versailles, an honor typically reserved for royalty. Louis XV was deeply affected by her death. For nearly 20 years, a woman with no official political title had effectively helped govern France, guided its foreign policy, championed its arts, and remained a steadfast companion to its king, demonstrating the immense unofficial power a determined and intelligent courtier could achieve. Number 1. Empress Dowager Cixi. The concubine who ruled China from behind a silk screen for almost 50 years. For nearly half a century, from the 1860s until her death in 1908, Empress Dowager Cixi was the most powerful figure in China, effectively controlling the Tenzin dynasty. Yet, for much of this time, especially in the beginning, her power was unofficial, exercised from behind the curtain as a regent for child emperors, or by manipulating those on the throne. Her journey from a low-ranking imperial concubine to the de facto ruler of a vast empire is a tale of shrewd political maneuvering, ambition, and survival. Cixi, born Yahenira Singzhen in 1835, entered the Forbidden City in 1852 as a concubine to the Yanfeng Emperor. She was initially of a lower rank, but her fortunes changed dramatically when in 1856 she gave birth to Cixi, the emperor's only surviving son. This elevated her status significantly, and she was given the title Concubine Yi. As the mother of the heir apparent, she gained more access to the emperor and began to learn about state affairs, reportedly even helping the often ill emperor review documents. The Yanfeng Emperor died in 1861, at a time when China was reeling from internal rebellions like the Taiping Rebellion and foreign encroachments, notably the Second Opium War, which saw Anglo-French forces occupy Beijing. On his deathbed, Yanfeng appointed a council of 8 regents to govern for his 5-year-old son, now the Tongxi Emperor. Cixi, now Empress Dowager, along with the late emperor's principal wife, Empress Dowager Chand, who was childless but held a higher rank, was largely excluded from direct power by these regents. However, Cixi was not one to be sidelined. In a bold and risky move, Cixi allied herself with Prince Gong, the late emperor's capable brother, who had also been excluded from the regency. Together, they orchestrated a coup d'état later in 1861, known as the Signaux coup. The 8 regents were arrested, with some executed and others forced to commit suicide or exiled. Cixi and Chan were declared co-regents for the young Tongxi Emperor, with Prince Gong as their chief advisor and head of government. This was the beginning of Cixi's rule from behind the curtain. Cui Lianting. Officially, the 2 Empress Dowagers made decisions together, but Cixi, being more politically astute and assertive, and the biological mother of the emperor, gradually became the dominant force. She would sit behind a silk screen during audiences, listening to ministers and issuing edicts in her son's name. During the Tangxi Restoration, roughly 1860 to 1874, a period named after her son's reign. Cixi supported reform-minded officials like Zheng Gulfan, Li Hongzhang, and Gaozong Tang, who successfully suppressed major rebellions and initiated the self-strengthening movement, an effort to modernize China by adopting Western technology. While Prince Gong was a key figure in these efforts, Cixi's backing was crucial. She showed a pragmatic side, willing to employ talented Han Chinese officials even though she was Manchu. When the Tongxi Emperor died young in 1875 without an heir, some accounts suggest from smallpox, others hint at a dissolute lifestyle. Cixi made another decisive move that solidified her power. Breaking imperial succession rules, she selected her 3-year-old nephew, Zetian, as the new emperor, the Guangxu Emperor. This was controversial because, by custom, the new emperor should have been from the next generation to be able to perform ancestral rites for Tongxi. By choosing another child emperor, Cixi ensured she could continue as regent along with Chan until Chan's death in 1881, after which Cixi held sole regency. Even when the Guangxu Emperor formally came of age in 1889 and Cixi officially retired to the Summer Palace, she retained enormous influence. She had loyal officials in key positions and kept a close watch on political developments. When Guangxu, influenced by reformist thinkers like Kang Yue, launched the 100 Days Reform in 1898, a series of radical edicts aimed at modernizing China's government, military, and education system, Cixi saw it as a threat to her own power and the conservative Manchu establishment. With the support of conservative officials and military leaders like Yuan Shikai, Cixi staged another coup. She had the Guangxu Emperor placed under house arrest and resumed active control of the government, effectively ending the reforms. Her support for the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, an anti-foreign, anti-Christian uprising, proved disastrous. After the Boxers besieged the foreign legations in Beijing, an 8-nation alliance invaded China, occupied Beijing, and forced the imperial court, including Cixi and Guangxu, to flee. China was forced to sign the humiliating Boxer Protocol, which included a massive indemnity. In the final years of her rule, Cixi did implement some of the reforms she had previously opposed, such as modernizing the education system and military and promising a constitution. It was perhaps too little, too late. Cixi died in November 1908, just one day after the Guangxu Emperor, whose death is now believed by many to have been caused by arsenic poisoning, possibly on Cixi's orders, or by her allies to prevent him from regaining power. Before her death, she appointed the infant Puyi as the next emperor. Her nearly 5-decade grip on power, initiated through a coup and maintained by shrewd political maneuvering from behind the scenes, profoundly shaped the last decades of imperial China. She was never officially the Empress regnant, always ruling in the name of others, yet her unofficial authority was absolute for much of her reign, making her one of history's most formidable female political figures.